그런 것 같더니.
Two chemicals were introduced: hydrated zinc through the northern shell and a dilute hydrochloric acid through the southern shell. And this vessel represents the Queen's Chamber. Into the tubes, we're going to pour hydrated zinc and then hydrochloric acid. When you bring these two liquids together, a chemical reaction occurs, and a product of that chemical reaction is hydrogen. And you can see the vapor, the hydrogen, escaping through the chimney, and there you have the reaction.
Adding credibility to Chris Dunn's remarkable theory is the fact that traces of both zinc and hydrochloric acid have recently been found in the shafts leading to the so-called Queen's Chamber. But if the pyramid was really designed as a gigantic power plant, how was that power applied?
We can come up with all kinds of devices to power with that kind of energy, from simple domestic appliances to highly advanced spacecraft.
Might the Great Pyramid of Giza have been designed as part of an enormous network of ancient power plants, not 4,000 years ago, but much, much earlier, and by a civilization with incredibly advanced knowledge? Ancient astronaut theorists say yes, and believe there might be a connection between the pyramid's design as a power plant and the possible contents of the pyramid's newly discovered chamber.
I think that with this new technology, we've entered a new age of discovery. So I can't wait to see what we'll discover next. So we're on our way to the Sphinx. Are we able to get up close?
Up close to the Sphinx? Yeah, absolutely.
One day after their incredible journey inside the forbidden chambers of the Great Pyramid, ancient astronaut theorist Giorgio Tsoukalos and Egyptologist Rami Rahmani returned to the Giza Plateau, this time to investigate another of the area's ancient wonders, the Great Sphinx.
No one is allowed to actually go down and get close, like between the paws of the Sphinx. No one except for me. And now you.
Oh my God.
Joining them is Rami's family friend, Dr. Zahi Hawass. Dr. Hawass is arguably the world's best-known Egyptologist, and in 2011, Egypt's first Minister of State Antiquities Affairs.
What is so special about the Sphinx?
The magic of the Sphinx. Actually, it's magic. It's the face of a king, a body of a lion. It shows the power of the king. And actually, if you look at the face, it's keeping the record, not only of Egypt, but the whole world. That is the magic and the mystery of the Sphinx.
It's beautiful.
For centuries, the Great Sphinx had appeared only as a giant head peering out from a mound of deep desert sand. Only after years of excavation was the enormity of the structure once again revealed to the world. According to mainstream archaeologists, the Sphinx dates back to approximately 2500 BC, during the reign of the pharaoh Khafra. But in recent years, that information has been challenged by new research, which suggests that the Sphinx could be much, much older, possibly more than 10,000 years old.
In your opinion, what is the most fascinating thing about the Sphinx that you want people to know?
You know, I really want the people to know that this is a unique statue. It's never happened in ancient Egypt. And that film also is very interesting. The hieroglyphic is telling us a magnificent story about Thutmose IV.
What does it say?
It say the Sphinx came to Thutmose IV and told him, I'm dying because of the sand. Then what he did, he excavated. He's the first archaeologist. He excavated around the Sphinx.
Carved in rock and located between the paws of the Sphinx is an ancient inscription known as the Dream Stela. although mainstream archaeologists believe it provides evidence that the enormous statue was carved approximately 4,500 years ago, ancient astronaut theorists, as well as a growing number of archaeologists, believe the carving provides compelling evidence that the Sphinx was actually constructed much, much earlier.
The Stelae writings tell us about a time when the gods still mingled with human beings. The ancient Egyptians were very clear in this.
Ancient astronaut theorists are also intrigued by another part of the inscription, in which the Sphinx tells Thutmose that once dug out from the sand, the earth and everything illuminated by the flashing eye of the Lord of all would be his.
Now, the amazing thing about this is that we are learning of what's called the flashing eye of the Lord. What is the flashing eye of the Lord? This sounds like some kind of technology that is in communication with the Sphinx, or perhaps channeled by the Sphinx, that could ensure the prosperity of Thutmose's support.
The Sphinx is credited with ensuring the prosperity of Thutmose's dynastic family that would later include the pharaoh Akhenaten. During his reign, Akhenaten decreed that Egypt would no longer worship a number of gods, but just one, the god Aten, who was depicted as a golden disc in the sky.
Akhenaten was said to become enthralled with the sun disk and his eye of the Lord. Is it possible that the eye of the Lord and the Aten disk are one and the same, and that they are, in fact, some kind of UFO spaceship that's hovering over Egypt as an eye in the sky and is guiding Egyptian civilization?
There is literally no technology out there, not even carbon dating, that can actually tell us how old exactly the Sphinx is. Mainstream Egyptology and mainstream archaeology claim that the Sphinx was sculpted the same time the second pyramid was.
走嘞！
It's a guess.
操
All the
鸡巴呀，
modern
真的
data。is still a guess. We could be off by thousands of years. What do you think about the alternative idea that the Sphinx was sculpted 12,000 years ago?
It's true. The people, the culture who did that, they should leave an evidence. I excavated northeast of the Sphinx, an area that never excavated before. The oldest level was 4,600 years ago, the Old Kingdom. There was nothing before the Old Kingdom. We brought a scientist from Louisville University, and he examined the wall around the Sphinx, and they found out it's from wind.
The erosion?
The erosion is wind erosion.
Dr. Hawaz's contention that the erosion evident around the base of the Great Sphinx was caused by wind is one that is widely held by many scholars and mainstream archaeologists. But an increasing number of geologists, including Dr. Robert Schoch, who has studied the geological features of the Sphinx for more than 20 years, are convinced that this is not the case.
My geological analysis has indicated that the Sphinx goes back much earlier to what I call forgotten civilization before dynastic Egypt. A couple of Egyptologists in the early 20th century saw that there were weathering patterns on the Sphinx that seemed not to fit the weathering patterns of the other structures on the Giza Plateau. So I went to look at this with a critical geological eye, and sure enough, I found that there was an incredible discrepancy between what we see on the Sphinx and other structures on the Giza Plateau. Here we have a photograph of the Sphinx on the left side. This is the rump of the Sphinx. This is the wall of the Sphinx enclosure. When you look at this, these are the lines of rock, or the strata as we say geologically. You can see how they've been weathered out sort of a rounded, rolling profile.
走嘞，Hello！
By rain beating down and running over the rock. This was very evident to me as a geologist. This had to go back to an earlier
你有
time.
serious problem 啊！
If the Sphinx was built
我
in
真的真的。
sea, there would not be the amount of water
Egyptian gods, dating back to the time of Isis and Osiris? But if that is true, why was the colossal statue changed, and when? Perhaps the answer lies, like most of Egypt's secrets, buried deep beneath the desert sands, in an area located approximately 300 feet north of the Sphinx. Relatively unexplored, it is an area where some archaeologists and researchers believe lies yet another Sphinx, still deeply buried, and still bearing the head of the god Anubis.
Some people believe there was another Sphinx.
It is an idea of symmetry.
Exactly. You're a good archaeologist.
If the ancient Egyptians didn't build the Sphinx, who did? And why? Could it have been used by a civilization far advanced from the one later depicted on the walls of Egypt's tombs and temples? A civilization whose origins were, as numerous ancient Egyptian texts suggest, not of this world. Luxor, Egypt, 1822. While exploring a tomb in the Theban necropolis, a site used for ritual burials for much of the Pharaonic period, Italian antiquities collector Bernardino Clementi comes upon an ancient papyrus document broken up into more than 300 pieces. When it is first gathered at the Museo Egizio in Turin, Italy, the document is found to contain the most extensive list to date of all the Egyptian kings.
So in the Turin Papyrus, we have three columns. And the first column is of the gods of ancient Egypt. The second column is of mythical kings that ruled back into far prehistory of Egypt. And the third column is of historical kings and pharaohs of Egypt. And these are people that we have an actual historical record for. So here we have a list of kings of Egypt that's essentially saying that Egypt has existed as a country for 36,000 years.
If the so-called Turin King List is, as many ancient astronaut theorists believe, an accurate account of all the rulers of ancient Egypt, then everything that is traditionally taught or believed about mankind's history would be thrown into serious question.
The implications are scary, because this would rewrite world history as we know it. Robert Bova suggested that the position of the pyramids aligned exactly with the belt stars of Orion back in 10,500 BC. Later, Graham Hancock determined that the Sphinx also looks out directly at the constellation of Leo at exactly the same time, which was also 10,500 BC.
10,500 BC? More than 8,000 years earlier than what mainstream scholars have long believed to be true? Ancient astronaut theorists say yes, and believe that somewhere hidden inside the Great Sphinx could be the proof they have been searching for concerning mankind's extraterrestrial origins. Virginia Beach, Virginia, 1932. Edgar Cayce, an American psychic and healer, famous for remotely and accurately diagnosing illness in patients located hundreds of miles away, has a profound vision while in a self-induced trance. He sees himself as a high priest in ancient Egypt, a priest who was directly associated with the building of the Sphinx. According to Cayce's vision, this occurred not in 2500 BC, as mainstream archaeologists suggest, but 8,000 years earlier.
One of the greatest sources for information on the elder civilization of Egypt is Edgar Cayce. He is known as the Sleeping Prophet, an American psychic to note. He refers on one occasion to the date of 10,390 BC, when he tells us not only was this the time that the Great Sphinx of Giza was created, but it also tells us that the records of some previous civilization that had existed on Atlantis were buried within this.
Atlantis, the legendary lost continent? According to the Greek philosopher Plato, who wrote about it in the 4th century BC, Atlantis was an island in the Atlantic that was home to a highly advanced civilization, but was wiped out by a great flood. In his vision, Edgar Casey believed he saw, under the right paw of the Sphinx, a chamber that holds a hall of records from the lost civilization of Atlantis.
Edgar Casey said it's a repository of high-tech devices and machines that had been left there for thousands of years for people to discover during our time period on Earth, our civilization, that we would discover these ancient high-tech artifacts in chambers beneath the Sphinx.
Based on Plato's writings, Atlantis would have existed approximately 12,000 years ago. This matches up with the time period when the Giza pyramids and the Sphinx were aligned with the constellations of both Orion and Leo. Some researchers also suggest this was the same era that was described in ancient writings as Egypt's so-called Golden Age, or Zap Tepi, a time in Egyptian prehistory when the god Osiris had come down to Earth from the stars.
There are accounts from the walls of different temples that tell of an earlier age of activity. And it was said that this was when the gods themselves actually enter into Egypt and create everything that becomes a part of the later Egyptian civilization. They create the first enclosure, the first temple, which suggests some form of high technology and suggests that we might be dealing here with an advanced culture.
Although there are many who dismissed Edgar Casey's incredible vision as a mere hallucination, in 1978, 46 years after his trance, two of the tunnels Casey envisioned were indeed discovered, one behind the head of the Sphinx and another directly below. But mainstream Egyptologists continue to insist these tunnels were made long after the Sphinx was constructed.
As we look at the Sphinx today with magic, we believe in sacred tunnels, and all the things under the Sphinx, the Egyptian in the late period did the same, and they cut the tunnels to see what's underneath the Sphinx. And we excavated the largest tunnel of the 4 tunnels that they found. When we found inside these tunnels, total dated to 500 BC.
But is the discovery of 2,500-year-old pottery proof that the tunnels beneath the Sphinx were made at the same time? Ancient astronaut theorists say no, and argue that artifacts from an earlier period could have been removed during the Sphinx's numerous renovations. They also believe more evidence can be found by exploring additional pyramids throughout Egypt and by examining the legends concerning a mysterious capstone and its direct link to extraterrestrial visitations. Saqqara, Egypt. This ancient necropolis, located 15 miles south of the Giza Plateau, is home to what mainstream archaeologists suggest is the first pyramid ever built in Egypt, the Step Pyramid of King Djoser.
The Step Pyramid at Saqqara is known as the Stairway to Heaven. The complex is vast. It's about 40 acres, entirely walled in. There's a 30-foot long, 13 false doors. You only get in through where the right door is.
100-foot-tall step pyramid out of mud bricks to building a monumental marvel like the Great Pyramid in only 80 years to be a virtual absurdity. They also believe that the mathematical precision of the Great Pyramid's construction, coupled with its precise alignments, not only with regard to Earth's cardinal directions, but also to the Orion constellation, is proof that it was built by a highly advanced civilization.
One of the things you find, for example, is that if you take the geodetic casing of the Great Pyramid as a decimal degree, it creates a string of numbers to match the same numbers as the speed of light traveling through space, measured in meters per second. Another thing we find as well is that if you pass the Great Circle from the Great Pyramid through its cardinal and its ordinal directions, what we find is that these circles will pass through more landmass of the Earth than any other location on Earth. You find that the Great Pyramid is essentially located at the centre of the world's landmass. I personally think that Egyptologists have got something wrong somewhere. It's as simple as that, and we need to put this evidence aside, step back a bit, and just look at these monuments afresh.
According to ancient astronaut theory, the Great Pyramid was most likely built more than 12,000 years ago, some 7,000 years before the building of the Step Pyramid, and sometime before the cataclysmic event known as the Great Flood. They also believe that after the flood, the original function of the Great Pyramid as a power plant was long forgotten, along with all of mankind's other technological achievements. And then it would take a series of interventions by other extraterrestrial visitors to help humans rebuild the world they once knew.
In the text that we can read about Joseph, does he mention at all how he was inspired to build this?
There was one brilliant man. That man is called Imhotep. Okay? But in his technical ability, he was the designer and the engineer of that pyramid.
What does Imhotep actually mean?
It means, like this, it means I come in peace.
Really?
Yes, very much.
So the extraterrestrial greeting, so to speak.
Yes. He showed up into life and then ascended into positions so complete, which is very uncommon in ancient Egypt.
What does that mean? Really? I don't know.
You drop from the sky, or you come from the land. In Egyptian history, you can literally trace every position back to the appearance of Imhotep. Nothing.
Imhotep was a common thinker who grew through great influence during the time of the pharaohs that he served, and then became virtually immortalized. That is, unlike any other commoner, a cult formed around him. Some have suspected that he was possibly Joseph from the Bible. That's interesting because Joseph was an advisor to Pharaoh in about the same period of time. What we know for sure is that he was a brilliant scientist for his day.
Imhotep rose to the incredible status as the vizier or wizard to the pharaoh. This is where we get that word wizard from, vizier. There are great mysteries about who Imhotep was, where he came from. This is interesting because later on, Imhotep is deified. It was fascinating, the depictions of him. He looks like he's got this oversized head. He's got strange-looking hands. He almost looks non-human. And one of the extraordinary texts tell us that his knowledge may have come from the stars.
Did Imhotep himself ever mention where he was educated or how he came by the knowledge of building something like this, for example?
In ancient Egyptian history, Imhotep spoke like a true ancient Egyptian. And everything he has, his beauty, his knowledge, and everything he has is from the gods. Do we know how long he lived? That is also a mystery.
when the tomb of Imhotep is discovered, it will be the discovery of the century.
If the tomb of Imhotep is discovered, will it provide further evidence that ancient Egyptian legends of gods descending to Earth from the constellation of Orion are based on fact? Perhaps. But until that day comes, there are many who believe that proof of humankind's extraterrestrial ancestry already exists in the form of curiously carved pyramid-shaped objects known as Ben stones.
This is it, Giorgio. One of the many Ben stones or pyramidions inside the museum.
Look at it. It's absolutely magnificent. And it's perfect. I
Absolutely.
mean, if you look at it, there's not a single mistake anywhere. Just wonderful. I'm familiar with the stories of the Ben, and I'm fascinated that sometimes it was described as this shape descending from the sky with a lot of smoke and a lot of fire. Then a door opened and people walked out. So to me, as a mythology, that is fascinating because where did that story originate?
Yeah.
According to mainstream Egyptologists, the story of the Ben stone is part of a religious allegory, conceived by ancient Egyptians to explain how humankind was created. But according to ancient astronaut theorists, the stone is based on an actual historical event, one that predates the building of the Great Pyramid thousands of years.
So when I hear a story like the Ben stone, I wonder if this may have been some type of a craft. Egyptologists agree that this type of a shape descended from the sky in a giant fireball, made a controlled landing, the Ben stone opened, and people walked out. The first creator gods. In my opinion, I think these gods are flesh and blood space travelers whom the ancient Egyptians and many other ancient cultures misinterpreted as divine or spiritual beings because of their technological frame of reference of their current time. This ties in directly with the idea of misunderstood technology. When a technologically primitive society interacts with a technologically advanced society, the primitive society begins to worship the advanced society. I've once read that a Ben stone can also be considered the home of the gods. Yes, from my perspective, then that would be proof of extraterrestrial intervention. Right here, this is a